Part of me really likes it when developers take the time to build a consistent universe and style amongst their library of games, since it gives a feeling of continuity in a developing universe. And that's pretty much what Slothworks has been doing with their Meteorfall games. So today I want to take a look at their newly released third game in the series called Bramble Royale. As far as the premise of this, it's a simplified tactical game in the vein of Slay the Spire, but with 3 characters in a 2x2 grid fighting in an arena, with each run taking about an hour unless you get into a slog match, which is thankfully pretty rare. The story, at least as far as I've unlocked in the half dozen runs I've done, seems pretty straightforward. A gamble went wrong, the antagonists lost their arena, and they use a mystic relic as a prize to draw in fighters for a new one, with the titular Bramble being the big opponent that thinks he can't lose. There's of course more to the story, and you'll find that after beating runs, but for a first impressions, I'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum. And while the music, voice acting, and art style are all really well done, I wager the mechanical aspect is the real reason most people are here, and while I overall enjoyed it and think it's worth a shot for anyone who's a fan of card-based roguelites, I also think there's a number of ways the game could be improved, and also a number of things the game does right that other developers in this genre could really learn from. Now, first off, I'm going to say I enjoyed this game. There's a lot of good here, and if you like roguelite card battlers, you won't go wrong with Bramble Royale. But I do have some criticisms, namely the rate of difficulty scaling and the size of the combat area, but these are mostly personal taste and are easily overlooked in favor of the positives in most situations. Starting with those criticisms though, the biggest one for me is actually the size of the arena. It's a 2x2 grid for each of your teams, and you actually have summons sometimes, so it can end up with it completely full, where you're essentially deciding which character is going to take the hits to the face rather than having positioning be an option to evade or spread damage. On the first difficulty, this is not a huge issue, since you can usually just mitigate it, but as you move up and enemies gain tougher attack patterns, the lack of flexibility usually means you have no option but to use a character as a sacrificial pawn midway through a fight, at least if the enemy decides to go ham on you. Even a 3x3 grid for battles, yes, even for enemies, would have made this feel a lot more strategic rather than just what we find in simpler card battlers like Slay the Spire, where it comes down to face slapping and crowd control. Speaking of which, due to the shorter numbers of stages and runs, with around a half dozen or so being the norm, while it is possible to get some crazy combos going, it's usually only near the end of a run, since you only have the opportunity to modify your deck and units through training, card removal, etc. between each fight. So a lot of what you start with is going to be the same as what you end with. This is one area where a lot of the cliche select your branch path kind of games, in the genre at least, really do excel, since the opportunities are so much higher for going for a laser-focused or challenge run build. The only other problem I had in all of this was the difficulty scaling, namely Rust to Iron, the 2 lowest difficulties. Since in Rust, as long as you didn't go completely weird with your setup, it was usually fairly straightforward to get to the end. Shuffle your units around to spread damage, use block and healing, and deal some damage. In Iron, the difficulty ramps, with enemies even in the second match doing more than twice the unit's life, even after using the rest option to boost their life beforehand, negating most of the starting block you could even get. And this was even before the final wave of the match, so getting through Iron came down to the luck of not getting brutal matchups like that until near the end, when you've actually had time to get your gear improved, since even with summons, you're not going to be able to soak it all, especially the AoEs. Now back to the positive. That gear improvement I mentioned is done amazingly well. Not only do you have a few options for obtaining new cards, with the most basic being the shop, but you also can do training, which gives your character specifically a perk and a choice of a new card from their library. But there's also the ability to upgrade cards that is so much more interesting than how other card-based roguelites do it. Namely, you go to the upgrade station and you choose from 3 modifiers, and then you pay to apply that to 1 card. These modifiers are based on the characters in your party. If you have strength, intelligence, and faith, for example, on your 3 characters, it could be 3 strength, 3 intelligence, or 3 faith buffs as a selection. And each have their own flavor, so you can lean it towards one by focusing your party on one archetype or another. Now, the way these modifiers work is if you use the card on a character of that alignment, they get the base card plus the modifiers. If you use it on a character that does not have that alignment, they get none. This means you can get some fun specialization and punch with relatively unique cards. And yes, you can stick multiple modifiers on single cards as well. Now, it is worth noting you'll never have a party of all one archetype, since when fully unlocked, you have to form a party of 3 from a list of 8 characters comprised of 2 strength, 2 dexterity, 2 faith, and 2 intelligence. So you'll always have at least one dip into another flavor. And really, this is a good thing since each character feels fairly fun and they all feel unique, especially with their starting card selection. Though I do wish there was an option to see that card list before jumping into a run, just for ease of use purposes. And which ones you're going to want to use are definitely going to vary depending on your difficulty as well, since enemy attack patterns on top of getting stronger also change who they'll prioritize as you get into higher difficulties. Simply put, your backliners are not always safe, and you'll also not always be able to get enough shields for your tanks to soak the hits. One way they could improve the flow of all this, by essentially letting these pros make up for the flaws, would be to allow you to start your run in Rust difficulty and just continue on with that same team up through each subsequent difficulty. I'm not sure what you'd call this mode, but it would alleviate the run focus issue, it would curb the difficulty issue since you now have more tools at your disposal, and it would create more opportunities for unlocks, challenges, and interesting features, and also story continuity. The only drawback is that runs would unfortunately get pretty long, because one run now with only a half dozen battles is already an hour. Overall, I think it all just comes down to I like the game, the concepts, the music, and the aesthetic, and I enjoy how they built out their character improvements. I just wish it did this but with more room to play. Bramble Royale with slightly bigger arenas and more nodes to go through for improving and upgrading your deck into something really unique feeling would take this from a good game all the way up to a must-get if you enjoy the genre. But for now, the most I can do is recommend it, but I would love to see it taken further. Now, I did mention earlier that Bramble Royale has a feature that other devs should consider, not guarantee, but consider for their game. But it's neither a pro or a con for me, and that is the unlock all meta progression option. Mostly since the game does not let you build up any buffs or anything with meta progression, the key is that it does not unlock later difficulties or secrets either, just the group of heroes you do a run with, so it serves to unlock a way for people to approach the game in the way that's best for their tastes, rather than being forced to grind to find their fun, but it is still an option for those that enjoy consuming roguelites like that.